When you come to the end of your own strength, when every plan you tried has fallen apart, and when you feel like you have exhausted every human solution, that is the exact moment when the supernatural dimension of God begins to reveal itself in ways you never imagined. There is something powerful about the moment you run out of options, because that is when your dependence shifts from your own ability to the limitless power of God. He specializes in stepping into situations that look impossible, situations where the odds are stacked against you, where the circumstances declare defeat, and where everyone around you has already counted you out. The God of last minute breakthroughs is not intimidated by emergencies, tight deadlines, or problems that escalate without warning because he works beyond time, beyond limitation, and beyond human logic. There are moments in life when you feel pressed on every side, like pressure is mounting and space is shrinking. You feel the ticking of the clock. You sense the urgency of the moment, and you worry that time is slipping away faster than solutions can arrive. Yet, this is exactly the environment in which divine power operates most visibly. God waits until the noise of human help fades, until the strategies of the flesh collapse, until the voices of doubt fall silent, and then he steps in to demonstrate that he alone is the source of breakthrough. When everything else becomes insufficient, he becomes more than enough. When everyone else steps back, he steps forward. When resources dry up, his supply begins to flow. Sometimes God allows the situation to escalate to its most critical point because he wants you to witness firsthand that his power is not dependent on favorable circumstances. He wants you to see that he does not require ideal conditions to operate. He can move in the dark, in the valley, in the storm, in the fire, and in the final seconds of what feels like defeat. Last minute breakthroughs are not signs of God being late. They are strategic moves to reveal his glory in a way that cannot be confused with human effort. When he moves at the final hour, there is no one left to credit but him. No explanation except divine intervention. No story except the one he writes over your life. There are people who have counted you out simply because time has passed, because the situation has not changed, because the door has remained closed longer than they expected. But they do not understand that God is not governed by human timelines. He is not bound by calendars or clocks. What feels like a delay to you is divine timing to him. What feels late to you is perfectly aligned in his plan. He specializes in doing in one moment what would take others years to accomplish. He can compress time, accelerate outcomes, and position you for breakthrough faster than the human mind can calculate. You may be standing in a place where your back feels pressed against the wall. Perhaps the bills are due, the report is negative, the opportunity seems lost, or the situation has reached a point where no human effort can repair it. But this is where the atmosphere becomes charged with the possibility of divine interruption. This is where miracles happen. This is where the God of sudden reversals and unexpected victories reveals his hand. He waits for the moment when the odds say, impossible, so he can announce through your life, watch what I can do. He specializes in the unexpected, the improbable, the unimaginable, and the last minute turnaround. Sometimes the breakthrough does not come early because early would not reveal the magnitude of his power. If the answer came too soon, you might assume you managed it on your own, or you might credit a person, a connection, or a coincidence. But when the breakthrough arrives at the last minute, you know without a shadow of doubt that it was God. You know it was his hand that sustained you, his grace that strengthened you, his power that delivered you. Last minute miracles carry a different weight, a deeper testimony, a louder message to the world that God still intervenes in the affairs of those who trust him. When you think about the patterns of breakthrough recorded throughout time, you will notice that God often shows up right when the situation appears hopeless, right when the enemy believes he has won, right when defeat seems final. This pattern is intentional. It is evidence that divine intervention is not reactive but purposeful. God is not scrambling to fix your situation. He is orchestrating a masterpiece with precision. What seems like the closing seconds to you is the opening scene of his miracle. What seems like the end to you is the beginning of his breakthrough. There are times when the weight of waiting feels heavy, when you wonder why God has not stepped in yet, why the answer has not come, why the breakthrough seems delayed. But if you could see behind the scenes of your life, you would realize that he is aligning people, positioning resources, rearranging circumstances, and shifting spiritual dynamics to create the perfect environment for your breakthrough. Last minute miracles require divine setup, and nothing God does is random. He is working even when it feels like nothing is changing. He is moving even when the situation looks the same from the outside. Faith is often tested most intensely in the waiting zone, the place between prayer and manifestation, the space where silence can feel like abandonment. But the God of last minute breakthroughs does his greatest work in the silent seasons. He develops your character, builds your endurance, sharpens your vision, and strengthens your spirit so that when the breakthrough comes, you are prepared to carry it. The last minute is not only the moment of divine action, it is the moment of divine promotion. What felt like a crisis becomes the catalyst for your elevation. What felt like pressure becomes the platform for your next level. So when you reach that moment where you feel like time is gone, strength is gone, and hope is hanging by a thread, remember that you serve a God who specializes in arriving at the final moment with power, precision, and supernatural authority, transforming what looked like a breakdown into a breakthrough, what looked like defeat into victory, what looked like the end into a new beginning. There are seasons in life when you find yourself praying, believing, declaring, and waiting, yet the situation seems unchanged. It is in these moments that frustration tries to rise, doubts whisper, and impatience begins to creep into your heart. You may start to wonder if God heard you, if your faith is enough, or if your breakthrough is still coming. But in the unseen realm, something powerful is happening. Delay is not a sign of rejection, it is a sign of divine orchestration. Every prayer you pray is deposited into the atmosphere of heaven, and heaven is never silent. The waiting you experience is not a void, it is a process, a transition, a divine pause that prepares you for what is coming. Sometimes the wait is longer because the blessing is larger. God knows that certain breakthroughs carry weight, responsibility, influence, and ripple effects that reach far beyond your own life. To release that too early would be to release it into unprepared hands. Every delay becomes a shaping season, a refining, strengthening, and equipping of your spirit. While you may feel stuck on the outside, you are actually being elevated on the inside. God is building endurance, sharpening discernment, and expanding your capacity to handle what you are asking for. The delay is never meant to break you, it is meant to build you. There are things you prayed for that required time to mature. Character had to be strengthened, roots had to grow deeper, understanding had to widen. If God were to give you everything you asked for the moment you ask, you might mishandle it, misuse it, or misunderstand its purpose. So he stretches you, molds you, and teaches you through seasons that feel silent. He allows time to work as your teacher and patience to work as your guide. Delay becomes the classroom where your faith graduates from shallow belief to unshakable conviction. You begin to learn that trust is not built on speed, but on the stability of God's faithfulness. There are also battles being fought on your behalf that you cannot see. Sometimes the delay is not about you at all. It is about what is happening in the spiritual realm. Forces that oppose your destiny must be dismantled. Generational patterns must be broken, and hidden traps must be exposed. Heaven fights wars you never witnessed to make sure that when your blessing arrives, it arrives secured, protected, and unshakable. What you perceive as a delay is often divine warfare, divine strategy, and divine shielding working simultaneously around your life. God does not release a blessing into an unsecured environment. So he takes the time to clear the path before the promise arrives. There are people and circumstances involved in your breakthrough that also need time to align. Sometimes someone else must move, shift, grow, or be positioned correctly in order for the door God has for you to open. There are connections being prepared, hearts being softened, resources being gathered, instructions being spoken, and opportunities being shaped. Your breakthrough is not isolated, it is connected to a larger picture, a broader plan, a divine tapestry being woven together thread by thread. What feels like a delay is often God synchronizing everything with perfect precision. Waiting seasons also expose what is truly in your heart. When things do not happen quickly, you begin to see the places where you rely on your own strength, the fears you have not confronted, the expectations you must surrender. God uses delay to refine motives, purify intentions, and reveal what needs transformation. This is not punishment, it is preparation. He loves you too much to allow unchecked emotions or unstable foundations to stand beneath the weight of answered prayers. So he uses time as a tool to purify and position you for greater things. It is in seasons of delay that deep faith is developed. Quick breakthroughs create excitement, but delayed breakthroughs create depth. When you wait, you learn how to worship without seeing results. You learn how to trust without evidence. You learn how to walk without explanation. You discover a level of spiritual maturity that cannot be gained through instant gratification. Delay becomes the soil where unshakable, warrior level faith begins to grow. And when your faith matures, your life takes on a new strength that no storm can destroy. There are also certain blessings that require divine timing. God knows the exact moment when the miracle will have the maximum impact, the greatest transformation, and the deepest testimony. What looks like a delay to you is alignment to Him. He sees what you do not see. He knows what lies ahead. He understands the end from the beginning. If He waits, it is because the moment of release He has chosen is better than the moment you desire. The appointed time is always greater than the expected time. Your breakthrough has a date, a moment, and an hour already written in eternity. The waiting process becomes a spiritual training ground. You learn endurance, resilience, clarity, and unwavering confidence. You learn to differentiate between God's voice and the noise of your own emotions. You learn to silence fear, quiet anxiety, and rise above discouragement. You discover that the God who delays is not the God who denies. He is the God who prepares, aligns, strengthens, and positions. Every day of delay becomes a day of development, and your spirit grows stronger than you realize. And when the moment finally arrives, when the breakthrough manifests, when the answer comes, when the door opens, you will look back and realize that the delay was not a barrier, but a blessing, not a setback, but a setup, not a rejection, but a divine redirection, shaping you for the very thing you once wondered if God had forgotten. There are moments when life pushes you into a corner and everything in you feels like it is collapsing under pressure. You watch the situation worsen, the window of opportunity close, and the odds stack taller and heavier with each passing moment. You pray, but the answer seems delayed. You believe, but nothing shifts. And just when it looks like the final moment has arrived, when the report becomes final, when the deadline approaches, when the door appears sealed, that is the exact moment when God reveals a dimension of His power that overrides every natural limitation. He waits until the human solution has expired so that His divine intervention cannot be mistaken for anything else. There are breakthroughs that God intentionally reserves for the very last moment because early intervention would not capture the fullness of His glory. If the miracle came too soon, you might attribute it to coincidence, to hard work, to connections, or to timing. But when He shows up at the moment others say it's too late, When he steps in after every voice has declared failure, his power becomes undeniable. It is in those urgent, pressure filled moments that heaven's authority becomes most visible. When the situation reaches the final hour, God's sovereignty begins to shine in a way that silences doubt and strengthens faith like nothing else can. Often, God allows the clock to run all the way down because the miracle He is preparing is not simply for your relief, it is for your revelation. He wants to reveal Himself to you in a new way, to show you a side of His character you have not experienced before. You may know Him as your provider, your healer, your guide, but in the final hour, He reveals Himself as the God who defies impossibility and transcends time. When he steps in at the last moment, he is teaching you that his power does not bow to urgency, his wisdom does not panic under pressure, and his plans are never threatened by temporal limitations. There are times you feel like everything around you is working against the promise God gave you. The door closes, the opportunity disappears, the resources fall short, and the path forward becomes blocked. But what you do not see is the divine strategy unfolding behind the scenes. God will sometimes allow circumstances to deteriorate on purpose so that the miracle carries a weight of glory that no human hand can replicate. The impossibility of the situation becomes the canvas for his supernatural intervention. The darker the moment, the brighter his power shines when it finally breaks through. You may look at your situation and think it is too late, but timing is a matter of perspective. What looks late from earth looks perfect from heaven. God sees the past, present, future in one eternal view, and He knows the exact second when your breakthrough will have its greatest impact. He knows when your heart is ready, when the circumstances are aligned, when the people involved are positioned, and when the blessing will produce maximum transformation in your life. What feels like the last moment to you is the appointed moment to Him, the moment where everything He planned converges into divine manifestation. Sometimes the pressure increases because God is driving you toward a deeper level of surrender. When the situation becomes humanly impossible, you stop relying on your strength, your reasoning, your resources, and your strategies. You shift into a posture of total dependence on Him. It is in this space, when you have nothing left but trust, that the atmosphere becomes ripe for a last minute breakthrough. When you release control, God releases power. When you reach the end of yourself, you step into the beginning of what He can do. There are breakthroughs that carry generational significance, and these require the timing of heaven, not the timing of man. God knows that some miracles must come at a final hour in order to break ancient patterns, dismantle long standing barriers, and destroy cycles that have persisted for years. Last minute breakthroughs are not random, they are strategic. They are designed to uproot what has resisted change for too long and to establish something new, strong, and lasting in your life. The timing is precise not because God is late, but because He is exact. Often, the tension you feel in the final moments is not a sign of defeat, but a sign of transition. When the situation reaches its tightest point, when your faith feels stretched thin, when the pressure intensifies so heavily that you can hardly breathe, that is when something spiritual is shifting. The final moment is often the doorway to sudden manifestation. The atmosphere becomes spiritually charged, and heaven prepares to collide with earth in a way that brings rapid, undeniable change. The pressure is often the sign that breakthrough is not coming from a distance. It is right at the doorstep. When God waits until the last moment, He also silences every critic and every doubter. Those who said it would never happen, those who thought you were dreaming too big, those who believed your situation was beyond repair suddenly become witnesses of what God can do. Last minute breakthroughs are often public testimonies of divine authority. They reveal that no person has the final word, no circumstance has the final say, and no earthly timeline can override the timing of heaven. The final moment becomes the stage on which God reveals his supremacy. And when he steps in at that last moment, when the breakthrough arrives in the very second when all hope seems lost, you realize deeply that his power is not constrained by time. His promises are not weakened by delay, and his plans for your life are never at risk of expiring, because he is the God who steps in when human ability ends, the God who moves when the situation looks impossible, the God who reserves his most powerful miracles for moments when only he can receive the glory. There are seasons in life when everything around you feels dark, heavy, and uncertain, like you are walking through your own personal midnight. The night seems long, the silence feels suffocating, and the answers you seek appear far out of reach. You look for signs, for direction, for some sort of indication that things will get better, yet nothing seems to shift. But what many do not realize is that midnight is not the end of a day. It is the beginning of a new one. Midnight is the moment when heaven prepares to intervene in the unseen, long before the light breaks through in the natural. It is in this very hour that God begins orchestrating movements, aligning breakthroughs, and preparing the manifestation of what you have been believing for. When you are in your midnight season, you may feel the weight of discouragement pressing on your shoulders. You may feel abandoned, forgotten, or overlooked. But heaven is not silent in your midnight. It is simply working behind the veil. Midnight is the hour of divine transitions, the hour when God begins shifting things in the spiritual realm, even if nothing has changed yet in the physical. The darkness you feel is not a sign of defeat, but a sign that something is reordering itself in the spirit. Midnight is not a period of hopelessness. It is a sacred backdrop for supernatural intervention. Often, the midnight season is where faith is tested most intensely. When you cannot see a way forward, when the path ahead is hidden, and when your emotions wrestle with fear, that is when your faith learns to breathe without sight. Midnight faith is different from daylight faith. It leans not on understanding, but on trust. It stands not on evidence, but on conviction. When everything around you is dark, your spirit is pushed to rely on the unchanging character of God rather than on the changing conditions of life. Midnight becomes the training ground where weak faith grows into unshakable confidence. There is a spiritual shift that occurs in the darkest moments of life. Midnight carries a prophetic symbolism. It represents the transition from one season to another. It is the hour when the old loses its grip and the new quietly begins. You may still feel the weight of the old battle, the old struggle, the old pain. But the moment the clock strikes 12, something in the atmosphere shifts. The transition may be invisible, but it is very real. Midnight is proof that even in the darkness, time is moving, seasons are shifting, and change is coming. When you go through your deepest midnight seasons, it is easy to believe that the darkness is permanent. But no darkness is ever permanent. Midnight is temporary, and the breaking of dawn is inevitable. You may feel overwhelmed, but the darkness cannot overpower the promise that morning will come. The same God who created the cycle of day and night created the rhythm of your life. He designed you to move from darkness to light, from sorrow to joy, from heaviness to breakthrough. Midnight is not a stagnant place. It is a passageway into something new. It is in the midnight hour that God often whispers the clearest instructions to your spirit. When distractions fade, when voices become silent, and when your heart becomes still, that is when God can speak without interference. Midnight moments have a way of stripping away the noise of life, allowing you to hear divine direction with clarity. The answers you longed for in the daylight often come in the quiet reverence of midnight. The revelation, the strategy, the insight that you could not grasp before suddenly becomes clear when you surrender fully to God in the dark. Midnight seasons also reveal what you truly believe. When everything feels uncertain, your declarations have power. When you praise in the dark, heaven responds. When you pray in the dark, the spiritual realm shifts. Midnight worship carries an authority that daylight praise does not. It is the sound of faith refusing to bow to circumstance, the sound of a spirit refusing to break under pressure. Midnight praise becomes the key that unlocks supernatural intervention because it tells heaven that your trust is not based on what you see, but on who God is. There are breakthroughs reserved exclusively for the midnight hour. Some miracles are only released when you reach the end of your natural strength. Some answers only come when you surrender the timing, the strategy, and the outcome to God. Midnight is where your spirit says, I cannot do this on my own. And heaven responds with, You were never meant to. In your darkest moments, God steps in to show you the depth of his power, revealing that the darkness does not intimidate him. It is the environment where his light shines brightest. When everything inside you wants to give up, the midnight hour calls you to hold on a little longer. The pressure you feel is not a sign that God is absent. It is a sign that breakthrough is approaching. Midnight always feels the darkest right before the shift. Some of the greatest miracles in history happened at midnight, not because God needed the darkness to move, but because people needed the darkness to see his light more clearly. Midnight pushes you to the edge of yourself so that you can encounter the fullness of him. And so, when you find yourself in a season where everything feels dark and uncertain, remember that midnight is not the end, but the turning point. The moment heaven begins to rewrite your story, the moment when spiritual forces shift, align, and prepare the breakthrough that is already on its way. When you pray, something invisible begins to shift in the atmosphere, even if you cannot feel it, see it, or trace it. Every word you release in faith becomes a spiritual seed planted in realms beyond what the natural eye can perceive. And God gathers those seeds and begins to water them with his timing, his wisdom, and his perfect orchestration. Sometimes it feels like your prayers disappear into silence, but heaven never ignores a voice that cries out in trust. And no whisper of faith ever goes unnoticed by the God who bends his ear to the cries of his people, storing each petition in the chambers of divine remembrance where nothing is lost or forgotten. There are moments when you pray and feel like absolutely nothing changes, but that is often the very moment when God is working behind the scenes in the most profound way. Just because you cannot observe movement does not mean movement is absent, because God often chooses to operate in the unseen realms long before anything becomes visible on earth. Your prayers go before him like incense, rising and filling the courts of heaven. And every plea, every cry, every groan is cataloged by the God who counts your tears and records your sighs. Heaven moves in response to faith, and your prayers are the vehicle through which that movement is activated. There are seasons when you stand in prayer and feel as though the heavens are brass. But even in those moments, God is closer than your breath and more attentive than your thoughts. He hears the urgency in your voice, even when you speak softly, and he recognizes the weight in your heart, even when you cannot find the words. Prayer is not measured by volume, but by sincerity, by the posture of your spirit, and by the trust you place in the one who holds time and eternity in his hands. What you call silent seasons are often God's sacred seasons of construction, where he is building, aligning, and rearranging things for your breakthrough. When you pray, you invite heavenly intervention into earthly affairs, and there is no situation too tangled, too broken, or too delayed for God to step into. Your prayers are not merely spiritual rituals, they are divine transactions where heaven partners with your faith to accomplish things beyond your natural ability. Even when you struggle to believe, the simple act of praying says, God, I still trust you. And that statement alone has the power to shift things in ways you cannot fully comprehend. God responds to persistence, to faithfulness, to a heart that keeps showing up in prayer, even when it feels hard. Every prayer you pray activates angels on assignment. moving with precision and purpose toward the outcome God has already ordained for your life. These heavenly beings are dispatched with authority to dismantle obstacles, silence the plans of the enemy, and escort your breakthrough into manifestation. Your words in prayer become their instructions, your faith becomes their fuel, and your perseverance becomes the force that keeps heaven engaged in the details of your story. Nothing spoken before God in faith remains idle, because heaven is always in motion when a believer prays. There are seasons when you pray for something over and over again, wondering why the answer hasn't arrived. But what you don't see is how God protects you by delaying things that are not yet ready. Some blessings require perfect positioning, perfect timing, and perfect alignment, and if God were to release them prematurely, the weight of them might crush you. Your prayers are not ignored but strategically processed through heaven's calendar, ensuring that what God gives you will strengthen you and not break you, elevate you and not overwhelm you, secure you and not expose you. Sometimes God waits to answer your prayer, not because you are unworthy, but because he is weaving together a miracle so intricate that it must unfold step by step. While you are praying for the breakthrough, God is preparing the people, the resources, the open doors, and the divine connections that must intersect at the exact moment for the miracle to make sense. You think you are waiting on God, but often God is waiting on the right sequence of events to converge, waiting for the perfect moment for your prayer to collide with his glory in a way that leaves no doubt that he alone orchestrated it. Your prayers do not evaporate with time. They gather momentum. Every whispered request compounds in significance, building pressure in the spiritual realm until God releases it like a flood that breaks open every wall standing in your way. What looks like denial is sometimes just stored power accumulating, waiting for the right moment to burst forth. God does not forget prayers prayed in innocence, in desperation, in hope, or in brokenness. He stores them, treasures them, and responds in the fullness of time with answers that exceed your expectation. When you pray, you align yourself with the will of heaven, and alignment is far more powerful than speed. God's response is not always fast, but it is always intentional, precise, and deeply rooted in his perfect understanding of what you need and when you need it. Your prayers prepare the soil of your life to receive what God intends to plant there. And even when you do not see immediate results, roots are forming beneath the surface, foundations are strengthening, and things are shifting in the unseen places that matter most. Every prayer you pray reaches God, and every prayer you pray is carried with care into the chambers of his presence, where nothing spoken is ever discarded or dismissed. Your prayers live, they move, they build, and they shape the trajectory of your destiny in ways you may not yet understand, but God understands. And he responds according to a wisdom far greater than what your eyes can see or your mind can grasp when God decides to move. He moves in a way that leaves no room for doubt, hesitation, or confusion. And his sudden interventions often arrive in moments when you have exhausted every effort and reached the end of your own strength. These are the moments when God steps in with a force that breaks through barriers you thought were unbreakable and opens doors you thought were permanently closed. His sudden move does not require long explanations, lengthy processes, or human approval, because when God releases a breakthrough, it comes with a speed and certainty that overrides every delay, every obstacle, and every opposition that once stood in your way. There are times when you pray, wait, strive, and hope until you feel drained, and it seems as though nothing is changing. But suddenly God breathes on the situation and everything shifts in an instant. It only takes one divine moment, one heavenly instruction, one supernatural intervention for what seemed impossible to become your new reality. God is the master of the sudden, the one who turns the tide in seconds after you've battled through years of struggle. And when he moves, The transformation is so rapid that you can barely keep up with what he's doing. His timing is never late, but often it appears sudden because you could not see the groundwork. He was laying in the unseen realm. God's sudden movements are not reckless or random. They are the culmination of his carefully orchestrated plan coming into full view. What feels like a sudden shift to you is often the moment when the invisible plan of God intersects with the visible world, revealing what he has been constructing in silence. He moves swiftly because the preparation has already been done, the prayers have already been heard, and the moment has finally aligned with his divine calendar. When God acts, everything accelerates, and the very things that once resisted you begin to work in your favor. There are breakthroughs that God releases only when your environment, your heart, and your spirit reach the state necessary to carry the blessing without sabotaging it. That is why his sudden acts are never premature. They are perfectly timed to meet your readiness and destiny at the same intersection. You may feel unprepared, but God knows the exact measure of growth your spirit has reached, the strength your character has developed, and the clarity your mind has gained through the process you endured. His sudden intervention comes at the moment when you can carry what he is releasing, when heaven moves suddenly. It leaves people around you astonished because they cannot trace the process, but they cannot deny the result. God does not need time to prove his power. He only needs the right moment to reveal it. And when he does, no force in the natural or spiritual realm can withstand his command. What others said would take years, God can complete in days. What experts declared impossible, God can overturn in minutes. What you thought was buried can resurrect with greater glory because of the sudden hand of God rewriting the narrative. The sudden move of God often exposes how limited human vision is and how vast God's power truly is. You may see obstacles, but God sees opportunities. You see closed doors, but God sees divine timing. You see delays, but God sees preparation. When he decides it is the appointed time, he bypasses every protocol, confuses every enemy, silences every critic, and elevates you in a way that no human effort could have achieved. His sudden intervention is not for drama, but for demonstration, showing that he alone deserves the glory. When God moves suddenly, it dismantles the plans of the enemy with such precision that the enemy has no room to counterattack. The very traps set against you collapse under the weight of God's intervention. The very words spoken against you lose their power, and the very weapons formed against you are rendered useless. God's sudden deliverance stands as a declaration that no darkness can triumph over a life God has chosen to elevate. The speed of his intervention is often the protection you did not even know you needed, shielding you from prolonged battles that could have drained your strength. God's sudden breakthroughs often come wrapped in opportunities, unexpected favor, divine connections, and open doors that appear without warning. One encounter can shift your trajectory. One conversation can redirect your steps. One unexpected message can initiate a new season. He moves in ways that bypass logic but fulfill purpose, orchestrating moments that reveal his sovereignty and his commitment to the destiny he designed for you. The suddenness is a reminder that he is not limited by processes, timelines, or systems. There are moments when you look back and realize that everything changed in a single moment, and you understand that it was God who stepped in when you least expected it. These sudden moves often come after seasons of pain, waiting, confusion, or silent endurance. But they arrive with such clarity that they redeem the weight of every tear you shed. God uses sudden breakthroughs not only to shift your circumstances, but to remind you of his nearness, his faithfulness, and his unmatched ability to move in power when you need him most. When God moves suddenly, he often accelerates you into a new season so quickly that you barely have time to process what he has done. What once felt stagnant becomes alive. What once felt delayed becomes urgent, and what once seemed impossible becomes undeniable reality. His sudden interventions are not just moments of divine activity. They are markers of destiny, reminders that he is in control, and assurances that nothing is too hard for him. No matter how long you have waited or how difficult the journey has been,